10. Casey White. Casey White was locked up in Alabama, convicted of murder, robbery, and trying to kill his ex. Oh yeah, and he kidnapped his ex-girlfriend's roommate as well back in 2015. Casey was what you might call a career criminal, and yet he managed to get himself into a romantic relationship with Vicky White, a correctional officer. With Vicky's help, Casey was able to escape his chains and go on the run. Casey and Vicky, who coincidentally share the same last name, met in prison in 2020. They became pen pals, then became romantically involved, and then partners in crime. Vicky sold her house, scraped together nearly $100,000, and broke Casey out of the prison. This was in April of 2022. They then led the authorities on an insane manhunt that lasted for 11 days. The jig was finally up in Evansville when the fugitives paid a man $100 to use his ID while booking a room at a motel. The police showed up at the motel, spotted the duo as they were exiting their room, and then got into a high-speed pursuit as they fled in a Cadillac. This pursuit ended in a dramatic crash, with Casey White pulled from the wreckage and Vicky found dead from a self-induced gunshot to her head. 9. Returning to the scene of the crime. A woman from Wisconsin named Amber Gonzalez was arrested on September 14, 2018 for stealing a cell phone from a hotel. She swiped the phone off a cleaning cart at the BEHEADED in Waukesha at about 12 o'clock in the afternoon. Amber was arrested pretty much instantly, then taken by the police to a holding cell. But once she was in the cell, she managed to slip her hands out of the handcuffs. The police had left her shackled to the wall, but Amber yanked her wrists free and then broke out of the cell. She actually found a set of keys hanging on a handle in the holding area, then used them to open the outside door. She escaped from the police station less than 5 hours after she was originally arrested. According to the authorities, Gonzalez ran through several backyards until she arrived at a convenience store. She met a man there and convinced him to take her back to the Baymont Inn where she'd been arrested in the first place. The employees couldn't believe she was back just a few hours later and called the police to come pick her up again. When the police got to the hotel, they found that the man who'd retrieved Amber from the grocery store was actually a customer who'd agreed to pay her $80 for an intimate favor. If Amber had just waited to be released on a small bond, she would have been free and clear. But now she's facing 6 years in prison for felony escape, along with an additional charge of prostitution. 8. The Warden's Daughter. On a Thursday afternoon in July of 2017, a prisoner in Louisiana abducted the assistant warden's stepdaughter following an unbelievable prison break. Deltra Henderson walked away from his prison assignment. He simply strolled off without anyone noticing, while he was doing time at the David Wade Correctional Center. He got into a car, then drove to the prison property where 19-year-old Amanda Carney was living with her parents. This home on the prison property was supposed to be a safe place, somewhere the inmates couldn't reach. Sadly, the teen's body was discovered in the woods outside the prison, where the police also found the stolen vehicle. It appeared Henderson had crashed the car, then stabbed the young girl to death before taking off on foot. Shortly after, Henderson came upon a local resident, stole another vehicle, and then crashed that one too. He then broke into the first house he found, discovered a gun in the home, and barricaded himself inside. He got into a shootout with the prison guards, and when the dust had settled and the bullets had stopped flying, they discovered his dead body inside the house. He had been fatally wounded while in the shootout with the prison guards. 7. Dead in Wilmington. In early 2022, 3 Tennessee inmates escaped from jail and went on the run. Tobias Wayne Carr, Johnny Shane Brown, and Timothy Allen Sava managed to sneak out of the Sullivan County Jail by climbing out of a roof vent. They then ran as far as they possibly could on foot and vanished. They showed up about a week later in Wilmington. Tobias and Timothy walked into a Speedway convenience store on February 5th at about 4:30 in the morning. They tied up the clerk at gunpoint with a gun they'd gotten from nobody knows where. They then stole money from the register, broke into the safe, and took the clerk's car with them as they fled the scene. Thankfully, they didn't actually hurt the clerk. For some strange reason, the robbers then drove past the convenience store a little while later when the police had arrived to take statements. The police saw them drive by, they chased the 2 convicts, and the chase ended at roughly 6 o'clock in the morning in a brutal crash. Both men were dead inside the vehicle. But a third inmate was still on the run and there was no trace of him. At least not until the next week, when he was tracked to an apartment by the Wilmington Police Department. Apparently, Johnny Brown hadn't wanted to take part in the whole gunmen on the run deal and had opted for a safe place to hide. It's just that Johnny's safe place turned out to be not that safe, and he was swiftly brought back to the prison. 6. The MAINE escape. In May of 2022, an inmate escaped from the Androscoggin County Jail in Auburn, Maine. The escaped inmate stole a vehicle, led the police on a long chase, and then crashed in Mechanic Falls before he even really had a taste of freedom. The escapist's name is David Ricardo Mockler. He managed to break out of jail by climbing the fence, squeezing himself between 2 rows of barbed wire, and then falling about 25 feet, 7.6 meters off the side of a roof. There happened to be a vehicle parked on the side lot right outside the jail, unlocked with the keys inside. It was the perfect escape vessel, and David really hoped it would bring him to freedom. Unfortunately for the convict, the only place the vehicle brought him was right back to jail. He crashed the stolen car, then drove away from the accident, and was quickly spotted by the police. He hadn't even crashed trying to escape from the cops the first time, but just because of poor driving. He then crashed a second time because his car was already messed up. David was taken away to the hospital with minor injuries. The police say it looked like he broke his ankle when he jumped off the roof, which was probably why he had such a hard time behind the wheel of his stolen vehicle. 5. Armed and extremely dangerous. In June of 2017, Sergeant Christopher Monica and Sergeant Curtis Bilyeu were murdered during a dramatic shootout on a prison transport bus during an escape. It all happened when inmate Donnie Rowe managed to open an unlocked security gate on the bus. This was the gate separating the inmates from the guards. For whatever reason, nobody had locked it, and so Donnie was able to slip through unnoticed into the front of the bus. Another inmate, Ricky Dubose, also went to the front of the bus with Donnie. Christopher Monica had fallen asleep during the transport. He was the first to go down. Donnie used the chains of his shackles to bash Christopher in the face, while Ricky grabbed a gun from a nearby weapons box and fired 7 rounds, ending the lives of both police officers. The 2 inmates then escaped the bus and were gone with the wind. But their freedom didn't last very long. They were caught in Tennessee 3 days later and have since been found guilty of murder. 4. Tractor escape. In 2019, an inmate in Tennessee escaped from prison and made it about 10 miles. His name is Curtis Ray Watson, and he broke out of the West Tennessee State Penitentiary after carrying out a vicious sexual assault on a veteran prison executive, then murdering her and fleeing the prison on a tractor. It took him 5 days to get 10 miles, 16 kilometers. He was discovered half naked in the middle of a field, cooked by the sun and covered in mosquito bites. By then, Curtis was somewhat relieved to just go back to jail. He'd originally been in prison for aggravated kidnapping. In 2012, Curtis beat his wife senselessly with a baseball bat and then kept her confined in the house. He was given 15 years to serve in Tennessee. And if you're wondering how in the world he made it out of prison on a tractor, it's all about the work detail. Curtis was given daily mowing duties, which meant he had access to things like golf carts, reflective vests, and yes, a farm tractor. He was seen at 8:30 in the morning near the on-site home of his victim, Deborah Johnson. He was then seen at around 10 o'clock in the morning, sitting on a tractor and driving away from the prison. But it wasn't until an hour and a half later that Johnson was discovered dead. And it wasn't until 2.5 hours later that the local sheriffs were alerted to a prison escape. He was caught 5 days later stealing drinks from a fridge outside a house in Henning, and after his trial was given life in prison. 3. Busting down the wrong door. A woman in South Carolina was home alone in late 2018 when something unexpected happened. There was a noise from her back door, and seconds later it exploded inward from the force of escaped inmate Bruce McLaughlin's foot. This guy kicked her door down, then entered the random woman's home and grabbed a knife sharpening tool from her kitchen. But the unnamed woman was prepared. She understood from all the racket that her home had been broken into, and she knew what to do. She retreated to her bedroom and armed herself with a handgun. She then waited there patiently, and when McLaughlin approached the door, she shot him in the head. She was a licensed gun owner, and according to the sheriff's office, did not commit any criminal act. She was simply defending her life and her home. Rewind several hours, Bruce McLaughlin had escaped the Pickens County prison with another inmate named Timothy Dill. The pair had assaulted 2 detention officers, locked them up, and then climbed over a fence and went on the run. Timothy was recaptured shortly after and sent back to prison. Bruce, on the other hand, was taken to the morgue and then to the cemetery. 2. John McCluskey. John McCluskey and 2 other prisoners escaped from a prison near Kingman, Arizona, back in July of 2010. Their escape was facilitated with aid from John's fiancée, who also happened to be his cousin, Kathleen Welch. She threw tools onto the prison grounds so that John and his pals could break through the fence. The gang made it to Colorado, where they got into a shootout with the authorities. One of the inmates was picked up, and John, his cousin lover, and inmate Tracy Province escaped to New Mexico. There, they carjacked a retired Oklahoma couple who'd been minding their own business driving down the highway. But these criminals didn't just hijack their vehicle, they killed them both, Gary and Linda Haas from Tecumseh, Oklahoma. After the killing, Tracy Province ditched the other 2 and went on his own way, and was caught in Wyoming the next week. But John and Kathleen remained on the run. They were finally caught shortly after hiding out at a campground in Arizona. When the police caught them, John was actually wearing Gary Haas's clothing, the very man he'd murdered. 1. The Broadmoor Killer. John Straffen is without a doubt one of the most reprehensible criminals who ever managed to escape a prison. But before we talk about the escape, we need to look at John's life. He was a troubled youth who attended what they called then a school for backwoods children. When he was a young man, he was deemed mentally unfit and said to have the mental capacity of a child no older than 10. In 1951, he murdered Christine Butcher. A few days later, on July 15th, he murdered Brenda Goddard. 3 weeks after that, he strangled Cicely Badstone and left her corpse in a field. It was after the 3rd murder that the police finally tracked John Straffen down and put him under arrest. He was deemed a serial killer, completely insane and of extreme danger to society. He was sent to the Broadmoor Hospital and in 1952 escaped. He scaled a wall, plopped down on the other side and took off. But instead of running away and hiding, John went immediately back to murder. He came across Linda Bauer, who was riding her bike in the small village of Arborfield. He kidnapped the child, strangled her, and her body was found in a field the next day. John was recaptured and sentenced to death. However, he later had his sentence overturned to life in prison because the British Home Secretary felt John was too feeble-minded to be put to death. He ended up being the longest-serving prisoner in British history, spending a total of 55 years in jail and dying in 2007. Would you rather accidentally cross paths with an escaped murderer or a lunatic broken out of an insane asylum? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and come back soon for another shocking video. Bye.